Welcome to the Wittliff Collections. My name is David Coleman. I'm director here. Thank you for braving the terrible weather that we have outside today. I'm really glad you guys could make that choice to come to this program, which will be really great with Susan Frost, talking to us about this amazing book and this amazing exhibition and the amazing collection that kind of builds the whole thing, that the whole thing is drawn from. It's a pleasure to introduce Susan Toomey Frost, who is a writer, collector, and I would say every time she comes to the Wittliff, you get this sense of passion from her. She's a tremendous woman of passion. She is a leading authority on Mexican and Guatemalan photographic postcards, which she has collected by the tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands. She also collects San Jose decorative tiles, as well as pottery, as well as works on paper by Mexican artists. With degrees from UT Austin in English and linguistics, where she was a Ford Foundation Fellow, Susan has been a full-time faculty member and guest lecturer at universities in Texas and also in Mexico. She has written 4 books, all dealing with Mexican themes and including Mexican postcards. Colors on Clay, the San Jose Tile Workshops of San Antonio. Timeless Mexico, which we co-published with her, photographs of Hugo Brema. Roberto de la Selva, Modern Mexican Masterpieces in Wood. And then the book we're here to celebrate today, Witness to War, Mexico in the Photographs of Walter Elias Hadsell. That book, by the way, is available for sale in our store. Makes a great Christmas gift if you're thinking ahead. Or somebody else has a birthday that you surely want to get that. In addition to these books, her articles and photographs have been published all over the world, especially US and Mexico and also Germany. And I want to talk mostly about Susan as a collector. She is an extraordinary collector. In the very helpful bio notes that she provided, she revealed, no, we asked her to provide them, so it's okay that she was telling us about herself. Her handle, as I would call it, on eBay is benign obsession. And I love that word benign because it resonates so strongly, I think, with the word benevolent and carries the values of being caring, compassionate, and generous. And while Susan is an extraordinary collector, she's equally a passionate donor to the Wittliff Collections. She has donated more than 50,000 photographic postcards, photographs, books, ephemera, printed matter, including the materials that you see, and much, much more in our exhibition, Witness to War. Now, we love photo postcards here at the Wittliff Collections. A little different than like what works you see on the wall here today in the large gallery, but they're remarkable documents of history. And as Texas State, our beloved university, continues its run to R1, the research potential of these photo postcards is really astounding. It's a significant trove of what I would call kind of a primary witness, primary account to the time that it was taken. And these are mined by students and faculty from a wide range of academic disciplines. They're just so great raw material for anybody to come and study. We've even had a photographer and artist, Daniel Ramos, use many of these postcards, or at least use copies of the postcards, not the originals, for a great artwork that he did, commissioned, I guess, for himself, but then we had on exhibition here in 2022. Susan has also donated significant pieces featuring her beloved San Jose tiles, including a 1936 Texas Centennial table, which conveniently for you is located in the store. So when you're going to buy the book, you can see on display, the books are on display on this amazing table, courtesy of Susan. And it's an incredible table. So again, please buy the book. Speaking of donations, this is a wonderful kind of circle of art that's going on just now. Her first donation to the Wittliff was back in 2003, when she donated a walnut dining room chair that the renowned folklorist and writer J. Frank Dobie always sat in at his home at dinner on his Park Place in Austin. And Susan donated that, as I said, back in 2003. When she bought those materials at Edgar Kincaid's estate sale way back in 1985, she also purchased the dining table and 7 other chairs that went around that table. And I'm delighted to announce that Susan is donating the table and the rest of those chairs to the Wittliff Collections, and I'll be picking it up later this week. Well, now you've stopped applauding, so that's not good. Please welcome Susan Toomey Frost.
Thank you, thank you. The seal here on the front row helped carry that table from the Dobie house to get in the back of my van. And, you know, there's so many of you I know and love and have known for so many years and share so much. So thank you for coming. So let's get on with the show, finally. I hope you got enough to eat. I was collecting all of Mexico. This is the last segment put together to come into the Wittliff collection. I tended to kind of wrap up a subject area or a particular photographer or publisher, and then get my babies into archival sleeves, all organized and everything into archival boxes. Then they'd come up here. Well, Veracruz was the very last one to come. And it was because it had become the most important to me in terms of the material that was involved. It became the most interesting thing, the thing that I got most curious about, ended up being the body of material that you see in this wonderful exhibition that Carla and Dr. Miller have put up. Thank you very much. The exhibition is great. And the way they're framed and displayed, I think you see the story in them. So there is a sensitive warning in here. Immediately, you're looking at some dead bodies. So yes, we have dead bodies on the street. So I'm not terribly happy to show you pictures of dead Mexicans, and I'm sure Mexican Americans don't feel very happy about it either. None of us do.
This is war.
All right, on with the show. I got very interested in this particular photographer, and he was a mining engineer who had graduated from Arizona School of Mines, and his first job, was to go to Mexico and be a mining engineer. Speaking of engineers and Arizona, Rocky, where are you? Stand up. Rocky is a fabulous collector, and he, I love collectors because they are some of the most interesting people in the world because they're so passionate about what they're doing, and what they're doing is important. Rocky collects, and he got interested in what I was doing, and because he lives in Arizona. And because he's such a wonderful fellow, he went around and did research for me, like in historical societies and things, where he might find information that he could pass on to me to help me in my research. Hadsell was known as Walter P. Hadsell. They didn't even have his name right. The Getty Museum in California, which is a huge database and resource archives for images, I wrote them and say, "You've got his name wrong." And they say, "Okay, prove it." And so I would send him like his birth certificate or his military records and, whatever material they asked specifically for, I gave it to them. I have tried and tried and tried with Arizona. And I guess, Rocky, you need to go talk to him, because I have not, on the websites, on their collections and everything, they will not change his name. I guess it's too much trouble. I don't know. But anyway, he was the mining engineer, and he wanted to go into business for himself. While he was at the School of Mines, his job was he was working in a photographic studio in Tucson. And so he had some experience in photography. When he went down to Mexico as a mining engineer, he was taking pictures throughout what he was doing and documenting the mining operations in Mexico. They were encouraging a lot of foreign investment, and so there were a lot of American companies, European companies, Canadian, companies that were into, I don't want to use the word exploiting, but, extracting Mexico's resources for the benefit of Mexico and themselves, which is what we call capitalism, right? He wanted to go into business for himself, so he got the Kodak franchise for Veracruz and moved to Veracruz. He had 3 children, all born in Mexico, and he went into business. And so these are the kinds of things he was doing, and you can see in this composite shown on the letters various scenes of Veracruz that he was taking and then made for Christmas greetings. This was not an uncommon practice among photographers who were selling postcards. And Veracruz at the time, we are talking about the period of the Mexican Revolution. Veracruz was the major port for Mexico, but because it's in the southeast portion of the country, it had not gotten so involved in the armed conflict, certainly, or in the political fight between what was going on and the struggle for power in Mexico. So it was sort of a much more peaceful place in Mexico than lots of other parts, certainly Mexico City. And so here we have just normal life and normal things going on in Veracruz. However, something else was brewing, and it was coming out of the United States. President Woodrow Wilson took a great dislike to the president of Mexico and wanted to get rid of him. And so this is Huerta, and Huerta had been complicit along with, I will tell you, the U.S. ambassador to Mexico was complicit in the assassination of Madero, the previous president to Huerta. So, Wilson needed an excuse. There was an incident in Tampico where some sailors got off a ship and went into town to buy some gasoline or whatever they were going to do, and they were arrested. So the United States was indignant that Americans were arrested. And so they demanded that Mexico salute and have a 21-gun salute to the American flag on Mexican soil. Mexico had apologized for the incident, but they refused to meet the demand of doing the salute. Well, this evidently wasn't enough for Wilson to violate the sovereignty of Mexico. But this next thing was. This is a German ship called the Baranga. And Wilson had heard there was a shipment of arms coming to Mexico that was meant for Huerta. Wilson had imposed an embargo. No American companies could be shipping or sending or selling anything to help Huerta. But here comes a German ship. So here's the interesting backstory that came out, years later. Remington Arms, our good friend, had sold the arms to Huerta. What they did to evade the embargo was to put these arms onto a ship and send it to Russia. So the ship went to Russia, and it gets there, and Remington Arms cleverly switches the arms to a German ship. And the German ship heads toward Mexico with the arms for Huerta. That gave the excuse to Wilson to capture the customs house and to invade Mexico and to stop this ship, totally in violation of international law. When the Mexican Army General Moss, sees, you can imagine if you saw this coming at you, he fled with the Mexican Army. So Veracruz was virtually left defenseless, a city of 40,000 people. It ended up that I was able to count on the postcards and other sources some 81 ships, at least 81 ships, the entire Atlantic fleet. They also called up the Pacific Fleet on the western coast of Mexico, in essence, was involved in this as well. They all got medals. So on April 21st, one day before Congress had approved the operation, their landing parties are coming off the ships to invade Mexico, or Veracruz. Now, when I said it was left defenseless, there was some defense, and it was done by cadets who were in the Naval Academy, took their rifles and started shooting. So the ships, 3 of them, battleships, gunboats, fire, their big guns at Veracruz. And they ended up injuring 2 of the cadets. You'll hear about them later, who are heroes because they are defending the motherland against the American invaders. And you can see damage that the big guns did to the Naval Academy. And it also damaged, this is a picture of the girls' preparatory school. And this picture, I don't know if it bothers me because the men who are standing there seem so genial, and they're smiling at the cameraman. And here we have a big gun with a bayonet on the end kind of pointed at them. This is a photograph, the 2 of them, that was actually taken during the landing party, during the actual, when the sailors are coming in. Sailors and Marines. And it was from ship's photographers from the USS New Jersey. Their names were Cruz and Shaw. Several of the ships had their own photographers and their own dark rooms and printing presses on the big battleships. So these are actual pictures. And the collection includes not just Walter Hadsell's pictures, but the other photographers who were involved. Many of the soldiers and sailors who came had their own cameras. So we get quite different perspectives from different people who were taking images. So there were deaths. An unknown number of Mexicans died. 19 Americans died. And there was taking of prisoners. And these would be mostly snipers who were locals who were going to the tops of buildings and then shooting down at the soldiers and sailors who were entering, or the sailors and Marines, excuse me. So this is in front of the main hotel on the Plaza, the Diligencias. We have bodies. There was even a body in front of Kodak, Hadsell's store. And here's a picture of the store and the body in front. The Americans, we can see how their attitude toward the Mexican dead, of burning bodies in the streets, or just stacking up the bodies like that. In contrast, the 19 Americans who died, their bodies were placed onto the USS Montana, a special ship that went back, took their bodies to New York City. So in this, we see a contrast of how we treated those who had died in the Veracruz invasion. They're marching across the Brooklyn Bridge. Thousands gathered on streets to watch the procession. Woodrow Wilson addressed thousands of people in the assembly you see in the bottom right-hand photograph. There's a whole series of these images from the honoring that had been given in New York City to the people who had died in Veracruz. About a week later, after the invasion, the Americans raised the American flag over the port of Veracruz, and you can see the brigade lined up to salute the flag. They played the Star-Spangled Banner, and to me, it was astounding to see in picture after picture after picture the thousands and thousands of soldiers who came after the sailors and the Marines left. The Army came in to take over and impose martial law on Veracruz for a period of 7 months and to occupy it. But we had tremendous numbers of service people involved in this operation. Here they are eating in front of the post office, the lighthouse. And another picture that bothers me, that they have an abundance of food in a town who has been isolated and cut off from its normal supply lines. And the card actually says, begging food from the U.S. sailors. And there are the Mexican women and the children begging for food. And Americans are having an abundance of food and eating in front of them. The sailors and Marines went back to their ships, and the Army came in. So we see Army transport coming in, and there will be thousands coming, as well as a lot of mules and a whole lot of horses, because we have the cavalry has come in. And here's a picture showing just how many horses and mules they seem to need in this operation of the port city. This is a Mexican photographer on the left that shows the American troops entering Veracruz with cannons. And troops, there were also printed cards. You've been seeing mostly what they call real photo postcards made with actual photographic paper. But this is an example of a tinted printed card. These two pictures are by Mexican photographers, and you can kind of see perhaps that there's a difference in perhaps attitude in taking the picture, where I don't know that these men are shown in their best light. I had the help in identifying some of my pictures from a man who works for the Naval History Institute, I guess it is. Dating, he could tell what brigade they were in, who was who, just by the clothing that they had on. So there was intense interest by people to join up in this and to volunteer. I mean, Mexico had insulted the United States. And so there was also interest in other countries. And it seemed like everything that I was reading and studying and seeing was that other countries did not approve of what we were doing in Mexico. And you can see this in cartoons from Punch, where the American eagle is clawed on the back of the Mexican symbol here, the donkey for Mexico. And then on the right, very interesting, look at the cut line on this, calling Wilson a Bronco buster, and the caption saying, President Woodrow Wilson, I wonder what to do next. And that's the whole point of this thing. You know, what was his intention in going into Mexico? And when he went in with this invasion, he apparently had no exit plan, nor any reason. So we'll see some pictures here. The foreign correspondence, because this thing, the invasion was so sudden that it was a day before Congress approved of Wilson going in to invade Mexico, that the foreign correspondents arrived too late to cover the wall. And these are, the major war correspondents at the time. We know they're Jack London, famous writer, and he was a war correspondent, and these other people. So that's how Walter Hadsell's pictures become so important. He was there. He had the Kodak shop. He had the equipment. He was an American American citizen residing in Veracruz. And so he captured like the first landing boats that you saw, the picture of the Baranga, his pictures, because he was there. Those pictures are so important because they document this incident. Well, it's more than an incident. Mexican artists are protesting in their art about what happened. In fact, there are huge protests in Mexico City, of course. Mexico is truly indignant that the Americans have invaded and are occupying. And you can see from the headlines, American flag trampled. So there are other front page stories where you can see how the media stirred up the American public to think, well, they're trampling on our flag in the street. We see mobs threaten to murder Americans. And of course they did. There was like raiding of American businesses. And so we had Americans who were living in Mexico, who had invested in Mexican businesses. They were encouraged by Porfirio Diaz to become investors in Mexican development, particularly the infrastructure and all, the mining and everything else. And so here we go, rushing troops from the front. And here's an interesting little thing, see where it says, here's the subheadline, Huerta arousing cadets at Mexican West Point by presenting flag that figured in 1847. Now, do you all remember 1847 when the United States invaded Mexico prior time? And we, through the Treaty of Hidalgo, we ended up with 55% of Mexico. We got lots of California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas. And so that flag, the story that they have, there are monuments called Niños Héroes, where cadets at the military academy at Chapultepec in Mexico City wrapped themselves in a Mexican flag and jumped off cliffs so that they wouldn't be captured or killed by the American invaders in the mid-1800s. You can imagine, with thousands of service people, the amount of supplies that would be necessary to feed and house them as they were there. The Army tended to put up tents. The Navy, when they came in, their first thing was to take over existing buildings like the former city hospital and to make their barracks and their place where their brigade would be housed and stay. I love this picture. This is by a Mexican photographer, Tinto Tinoco. What were the Americans doing all of this time when they're occupying a city that at that point is not fighting back at all? The fighting or the resistance only existed the first week. So here we go with baseball games, tug of wars, swimming competitions. There were also rowing competitions between the various ships, So here are our guys. It's a mass in front of the terminal station where the railroads came in. Things were brought into ships in the port and then transferred to trains, to get them on their way. So the Americans had the opportunity here to work on communications. The picture on the left is repairing telephones. The picture on the right is dealing with the telegraph systems. Now, you know what happens in just a few years. We enter World War I. The United States was late in entering World War I. What the Mexican operation told us for sure was that our battleships were absolutely no match for German battleships. They were way ahead of us. And so in this operation, one of the historians writing about, did anything come out positive about our invasion and occupation of Mexico? It taught us things like how to get supplies in and out, how to work on those things. A major thing is, this is a picture Hadsell took of the very first plane that is involved in an American military operation. They used the little plane, it was catapulted off of a ship. And then, set into the air by a catapult. And they were using it for, I guess, like aerial surveillance to see what was happening, if any troops were coming from inland into Veracruz. And the first, let's say, bombardment, the pilot in here was angry because people on the ground had shot at his plane. And he when he was flying, the only thing he saw there was a bar of soap. He reached over, got the soap, and threw it down at the ground at the people who were firing at him. And so this is the first time, the Air Force, this is the naval forces and a naval plane. And the Navy has a fabulous early, long history in hydroplanes. And we could practice learning how to build trenches and things. We're going to need that a little later on. In general, opinions by historians were very negative toward this operation and what happened. President Eisenhower's son, David, was a military historian, wrote a book called American Intervention. We've done this over and over and over again of what was termed intervention, or it is, I use the word meddling, in the affairs of countries, our neighbors, certainly Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, all of that. We have been involved in overthrowing governments and duly elected, democratically elected governments, and all. It's, I guess, something we do. And I'm never surprised if they hate us. That's one of the first things I thought of at 9/11 was we have made these people hate us so much that they do this in retaliation. Now here's a sad picture. Poor Hadsell. Here's a picture of him and his 3 children and a couple of nannies. And this is probably one of the very last pictures ever taken of Christina. Christina got dysentery and died in June 1914. And so Hadsell took the 3 children and Christina's body, got on a ship to New Orleans, and then went over to Mississippi. She was from Port Christian, Mississippi, and he took the 3 children to their grandparents and then buried Christina in Port Christian. Hadsell, when the occupation ended in November 23rd, 7 months later, there was a great antagonism to Americans, understandably, in Veracruz. He lost the Kodak business, and the materials, the papers, the cameras, the things that were there were sold on pennies on the dollar. And he ended up getting a job as a mining engineer, and he went to Honduras and worked there for a year. Ended up going back to his hometown, Ajo, Arizona, and he became again a mining engineer for a copper company. This picture, this picture is the centennial, 100 years after the invasion in 1914, the celebration of the 100 years. This is an exhibition that was held in Veracruz. And many of the pictures that you see on the walls here were part of this exhibition. And that is the president of Mexico, Pérez Nieto, signing the guest book for the exhibition. In Veracruz today, this whole operation, Veracruz has changed its name to Eroica Veracruz because it's been invaded twice now by the Americans. And the Naval Museum there and the Naval Academy is called the Eroica Navy Academy in Veracruz. That's an older monument on the top left. Here are the newer monuments. And the two monuments, the far left and the right, those are the two young cadets that were the heroes who fired. The one on the left happened to be the son of the admiral of the Mexican Navy, Azueta. The one on the right was named Uribe. But these are martyrs. Every year, the picture like you see on the left, every year the naval cadets put on a ceremony with a band and they march, and there's a whole ceremony remembering April 21st. We picked this day, the Wittliff did, for April 21st. So we are, the 110th celebration or commemoration. What do we want to use? It's not something we should be celebrating, but remembering it. When I was in Veracruz for one of the exhibitions, they put on like 3 exhibitions where they've used this collection. That in the Plaza de Armas in the main city square, there was a moment of silence on April 21st at the time that the Americans landed. And so Veracruz has never, ever forgotten this and remember it with reason. And when I have given lectures a couple of times where it involved Mexicans, it seems like this is not something that's generally known throughout Mexico. That's not something I think that they bring up a lot, that they were invaded and occupied. Maybe it's something we don't want to remember either. So that is kind of the story that is told through mostly postcards that I hope came out okay. And
we need to stand up.
You need to stand up. Oh, sit down, sit down.
You did great.
Okay, does anybody have any questions that I might be able to answer or lie about?
And we are recording this, so if you could wait till the mic comes to you so we can make sure to
Okay,
get your
and
question.
let me point out who came the farthest? We have people here from Arizona, but John O'Leary and Nora here are from Cholula, Mexico. And John is a photographer whose works are being collected here at the Wittliff. John took the author's photo that appears in the book. Thank you, John. Nice photo, and he was taking pictures today.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Patsy.
Well, I have always heard, and it's probably just folklore, that the Americans took Dr. Urrutia to the port of Veracruz and shipped him back to Texas. Is that true?
That's true.
Okay, I just wanted to be
That's
sure.
true.
I
They
wrote it in-
transported him. This is this is the San Antonio story. That there was a doctor in Mexico who left with, he had a clinic in Mexico City, and he left with a trainload of tiles and all kinds of stuff, and moved to San Antonio, bought land on the San Antonio River, and established a beautiful garden called Miraflores, established a medical practice in San Antonio, and is much beloved about his contributions and his family's contributions to San Antonio. Trinity has published a book by the granddaughter who did a great deal of research about her grandfather and the history of that garden, which is now in deterioration.
And we need help.
Yeah. So, another question. Yes, Sally.
I remember seeing a bust on top of a building that it was from that family, but it was headless. Do you know anything about that?
A headless book?
No, bust.
Bus. On top of a building?
Down near Breckenridge Park.
Near Breckenridge Park.
We have lots of mock with no arm.
Yeah, no arms.
No, this was not Guatemala. Supposedly it was a Uteria family person.
Well, that statue of Cuauhtemoc is there, and there are a couple of statues there. I'm not aware. I was involved on the master planning for the gardens and all. When the city ended up taking the gardens over. But I don't remember a headless statue. I was there for tiles to identify and to recommend what they should do with the tiles.
This was a head on top of a building.
A head on top of
Yes. The headless statue of Venus that Urrutia had on his house, and when he moved his things,
Okay.
it was a headless Venus, and the bus drivers are glad will tell you that that's Dr. Urrutia's daughter.
Okay. I always kind of remember as Venus as having no arms. But, okay, and he built a beautiful house that was torn down, and they put up a auto dealership in place of it. And we had this fabulous house on Broadway that was his.
And Denise Rodriguez
yeah.
statues have been brought to the gardens by Dr. Urrutia. They're 9 pieces.
Right. The garden is full of top. Patsy Light here has researched and written a couple of books on faux bois in San Antonio, the concrete that is fashioned and then painted to look like wood. And so we have a lot of this around San Antonio, and it's really wonderful. So that's Patsy's contribution.
Dr. Urrutia brought him.
Right, from Mexico. Dionisio Rodriguez was his name, to do these structures. And any other questions that, Tom Payton, the director of Trinity University Press.
One question I've always wanted to ask you what is the legacy, Hadsell's legacy in Mexico? In Veracruz, is he acknowledged for the value of having documented this moment?
I think John here, who's a collector too, I don't think he was very well known at all. Probably your book, Tom, is what will make Hadsell known. I've given a couple of 3 lectures in Mexico on Hadsell. But nobody else has been talking about him. Right, John? Right. There have been no articles published in the journals or Phototeca or any of those things on Hadsell. So there'll probably be a book review in the back pages of, yes, sir?
I was going to add that what's so important about the book is that it's bilingual, it's Spanish-English. And so you're going to be introducing Hadsell to Mexico by way of a excellent publication.
Yeah, that's wonderful that Trinity allowed the essay that I wrote, the space in a book, to have a bilingual translation of it. And that was done by a woman named Claudia Canales, who teaches at UNAM in Mexico City, at the National University. That's good because then Mexicans can read it in Spanish. And he's right. That's what's going to be introducing Hadsell as a photographer to Mexico. Because I think, I was getting the cards were coming out of, eBay, and another auction is called Del Camp out of France. So many of my cards, because they are of ships, were from Germany. I bought them from England, Germany, France. They came all over. I'll go anywhere for a postcard. If, and dumpster dive, anything. Yeah. Yes, Susan?
No, you go ahead. Here, go ahead.
How did it all fall apart? Did the U.S. just pack up and go on back north?
Yeah, I didn't tell you the end of the story. What happened? All of a sudden, Wilson must decide, let's get the hell out of Dodge. He just up and left. They left all of those cannons, all of those guns, all of those mules, all of those horses, all of the material, the tents, all of that. I think they took food with them because one of the postcards has the soldiers eating Thanksgiving dinner aboard a ship on November 24th. So that was all left for Carranza. Woodrow Wilson liked Carranza. Carranza later becomes president of Mexico. He makes Veracruz the capital for a while. Yes, sir.
Hi.
Hi.
So thanks for the awesome photographic display and the good backstory. So you talked to a Navy historian that could identify clothing and weaponry and all that. So I'm just curious, those guys go ashore, right, to get gasoline, which has always been a obviously fraudulent story. So I'm just curious if a fellow like that would know how long it takes to marshal the Atlantic fleet and sail them down to Mexico, and how long the lag period was between when those guys went ashore and when that massive, 90-ship fleet arrived. Sounds curious.
I'm not a military historian. And that would be so. This is how a resource like the Wittliff collection becomes important. That anyone who wants to research this, where are they going to go? I would suspect the largest body of collection is right here at the Wittliff. And so they're going to have to travel here and, ask to see and access this collection. I will also say, I meant to say, Rocky, when I was talking to you about you at the very beginning, that Rocky is the person who is responsible for our seeing in the gallery over here. Hadsell, when he went back to the United States and back to Arizona, took photographs. He was still doing photography. There's a series of the Arizona desert, which they're beautiful because they are really the images printed on photographic paper. And then he carefully took oil paints to hand tint those. And those pictures are in their original frames. And Rocky found those. So this collection that was donated, Rocky is responsible for this exhibition, not only meeting the needs of the Mexican collection of photography here, but Southwestern photography. And as Sally said earlier, the exhibition, the cards and stuff touch all the bases. But we didn't do Lonesome Dove today, now did I?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Susan.